Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of English Book on TV. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Darrell.
I'm Miss Samantha, and today we'll be discussing Emma by Jane Austen.
And this is for grades 10, 11, and 12.
Let's begin.
Let's have a look at the agenda. First, we will have a look at some vocabulary, and then a look at the author, and then a summary of the book.
After that, we'll really dive into the characters, the setting, and some of our main themes. Then, of course, we'll conclude by reviewing what we discussed and giving you some homework.
I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. Now, our first vocabulary word is matchmaking. Matchmaking is the arranging of marriages between other people, and the person who does the matchmaking is called a matchmaker.
Our next word is to introduce. Now, this is important for the story because it's to bring people together so they meet each other for the first time, which happens often.
Our next word is to meddle. And to meddle means to interfere or get involved in something that is none of your business.
Our next verb is to misunderstand. This is to incorrectly interpret or incorrectly understand the meaning of something.
And if you misunderstand something, you will probably make a mistake, our next word, because a mistake is an act or judgment that is incorrect or wrong.
And you probably will look foolish if you make a mistake, which is our next word, foolish, not having good sense or judgment, unwise or silly.
Now, on the other hand, moving away from the foolish, let's look at our next word, insightful. Insightful is having or showing a true and deep understanding of something. A synonym is perceptive.
And our last word is considerate, an adjective. It is being careful not to inconvenience or harm others.
Keep all of these words in mind throughout our discussion and for when you read the book. Now, of course, Darrell, we should talk about the author in order to understand our text better.
Yes, and today, for the first time, we have a female author.
Yes, I'm very happy about that, of course.
Me too. This is the famous Jane Austen, author of 6 major novels. She lived in the 18th century, the end of it, and lived to the early 19th century, dying in 1817. She, interestingly, she had to publish her books anonymously because women weren't allowed to be full-time writers in England at the time. She did receive positive reviews and moderate success during her lifetime, but her books became much, much more popular after her death. There's, hundreds of film adaptations and TV adaptations of her books now.
That's true. And all of her books critique and comment on one specific class in England, known as the landed gentry. And that consisted of gentlemen landowners and their families. They were part of the aristocracy, though they weren't the highest class. And Austen used irony, realism, romance, and humor in her social commentaries, which is part of what has made her novels so popular over time. Now, let's look at Emma, which is the last book published during Jane Austen's life.
Emma tells the story of a young, wealthy woman named Emma whose confidence in her matchmaking abilities causes her to meddle in the romantic lives of those around her, leading to many romantic misadventures.
After successfully introducing 2 people who ended up marrying each other, Emma decides to continue her matchmaking work, but she makes one mistake after another.
Now, the first mistake is with her friend, a new friend kind of, a lower-class friend, Harriet Smith. Harriet wants to marry Robert Martin, a respectable and educated young farmer, but Emma believes Harriet should marry a higher-class man.
So Emma first tries to match Harriet with Mr. Elton, who just wants to climb the social ladder. He is rude to Harriet, rejects her, and then proposes to Emma, much to Emma's surprise. She is disgusted by his proposal, and she feels terrible that she misunderstood the situation because it just causes Harriet heartbreak.
But Emma doesn't gain much from this insight and in this experience. Her second mistake comes when she believes a different gentleman is interested in marrying her and that Harriet is interested in marrying him. Well, what a triangle. However, it is eventually revealed that neither of those beliefs are true.
Now, while Emma proves herself to be quite foolish in matters of the heart, her sister's brother-in-law, Mr. George Knightley, proves himself to be quite insightful, as he correctly predicts the true nature of Emma's matchmaking misunderstandings. Mr. Knightley criticizes Emma for her meddling ways, and he encourages her to be a better person.
Now, because Mr. Knightley is so insightful and considerate, Harriet ends up falling in love with him, which causes Emma to realize her greatest mistake of all in all of this, that she has been in love with Mr. Knightley all along.
Luckily, all the characters in this story end up marrying their true loves, with Harriet marrying Robert Martin, the well-educated farmer who she was originally in love with, and Emma marrying Mr. Knightley, who has helped her become a more insightful, considerate, and mature woman. Now, we mentioned a lot of different names in this summary, so let's get to it with our characters.
Let's look at the protagonist, of course, Emma Woodhouse. She's a young woman, only about 21 years of age. She's beautiful, clever, independent, rich, and happy. She has no stress in her life, basically.
How nice.
Yeah, well, she's kind with a big heart. She really tries to help others, but she doesn't have a lot of life experience, which makes her foolish in the ways of the world. Though she's not trying to be cruel at all in her mistakes. She just misunderstands the situations, which leads to bad results.
Now let's talk about someone who has no misunderstandings, and that's Mr. George Knightley. He's Emma's neighbor and close family friend. He's older and wiser than Emma, which makes him see her foolishness and her accidental selfishness. He is the only person who criticizes Emma's actions and pushes her to be a better person and improve her behavior. He's insightful, considerate, and compassionate, and he's so happy to see Emma grow as a person because he's actually been in love with Emma for years.
Next, we have Harriet Smith, a new friend of Emma's, who's also quite young. She's beautiful but unsophisticated, so Emma wants to help her by introducing her to sophisticated, higher-class men to elevate her social status in life. So, as a result, she's subjected to Emma's poor matchmaking, which causes Harriet emotional pain. But eventually she does marry the person she loves and who is a good match for her.
Now let's talk about a bad match, really for anyone, and that's Mr. Philip Elton. Mr. Elton, yes, he's good looking, yes, he's ambitious, and he seems well-mannered, but his true sneaky character, which Mr. Knightley correctly figures out, is later revealed. Mr. Elton is only interested in becoming rich and gaining social status. So he tries to manipulate people to get that. And that's why he proposed to Emma in the first place, just for her status and for her money.
Our last character is Mr. Woodhouse, Emma's father, whose wife died a long time ago and he never remarries. He's very kind and generous, But perhaps the situation of parenting and childhood is reversed here, with Emma being a kind of parent to her own father.
That's interesting, and we'll explore that later, actually. But for now, let's move on to the setting, or the when and where of our story.
Okay, well, the story is set in the 19th century, Samantha. And this is the upper classes of the 19th century, so this isn't our usual Dickensian world. This is a strict social class structure that we're talking about here. And the upper classes were flourishing, were having a mini renaissance at this time with culture and refinery and all sorts of things like that. And you can see that in Emma, but you can also see that in her friend, who's kind of stuck between two worlds.
Great point there. Now let's move on to the where. The story takes place in the fictional country village of Highbury, England. It's not real, though it was based on many different villages that Jane Austen knew herself. And it's really focused on the domestic life in Highbury. So it takes place in ordinary locations for the land-owning gentry, especially in women-dominated spheres, because, of course, we're really following Emma's story. And those different women-dominated spheres include different estates, carriage rides, evening parties, the church, and the drawing room. Now we should take a look at our main themes, which of course are the main ideas of our story.
We have several themes to look at today. I'll focus on marriage and social status. Now, marriage, of course, is a big part of this book. Marriage can elevate people in society, according to Emma, and that's why she thinks that it's important for her to have Harriet marry someone richer, someone more from an upper class. But this turns out to be foolish because Emma finds out that people can't really jump classes that easily in this world. It's not our modern time, it's another world. By contrast, Emma herself, she's wealthy. She doesn't really have to worry about anything. So this perhaps might be a reason why she's busy matchmaking in this way, and you end up what we have.
Yes, and another reason Emma has these misunderstandings in matchmaking is because of parenting. And that's our next theme. Now, this is where we really understand why Emma is the way that she is. She was not disciplined by a parent, and nobody corrected her bad behavior as she was growing up. She has too much power and too much control over the world around her, and she doesn't realize the consequences of her actions because she thinks so highly of herself and doesn't realize how capable she is of making so many mistakes. But Mr. Knightley, he acts as a sort of father figure to Emma by reprimanding her and teaching her how she should behave. He shows her a kind of love that she never had, one that encourages her to be better, one that challenges her own ideas, and one that really encourages her to grow as a woman. There are so many more themes for you to discover in Emma, but we're just about out of time, so you'll have to do it on your own. For now, let's review what we learned. We talked about our author, Jane Austen. Then we moved on to the summary of Emma's many mistakes in matchmaking. We looked at some of our characters and the setting of early 19th century in Highbury, England, before finally talking about our two themes, marriage and social status, and parenting.
This will be a good time to have a look at the vocabulary that we chose for you connected to this book. Here are the words once more. Matchmaking, to introduce, to meddle, to misunderstand, mistake, foolish, insightful, and considerate.
These are great words for you to look at home. And that brings us to our final point of homework.
Now, Samantha, I've loved reading some of the submittals that have been coming in from all over Georgia. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. They have been so fantastic and so insightful. None of them have been foolish at all. So please keep sending us your homework assignments.
Yes, and here is the question of today. Describe a time when you completely misunderstood a social situation. What were the consequences of your mistake? Like, what came from it? And what did you learn from this experience?
Ooh, I am excited to read about these. They might be a little embarrassing, but I think they'll be entertaining for us. So please send us your homework to englishbookeducation.co.uk/homework. Thank you, of course, for joining us today on our discussion of Emma, and we'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
See you again next week.